The massive doors of the Galactic Council chambers opened with a deep rumbling sound that echoed through the vast hall. Jake Morrison walked through them with steady steps, his black uniform crisp and clean despite the long journey from Earth. Behind him came Lisa Grant and 3 other human officers, their faces calm but alert as they entered the most important political building in the known galaxy. The chamber was enormous, bigger than any stadium Jake had ever seen on Earth. Thousands of alien beings filled the curved rows of seats that rose up like a giant bowl around the central speaking area. Some aliens looked almost human, but with strange skin colors or extra limbs. Others were so different that Jake could barely understand how they moved or breathed. Giant insect creatures clicked their mandibles while talking to floating gas clouds that pulsed with different colors. Crystal beings that looked like living. Diamond sat next to what appeared to be walking trees, with faces carved into their bark. Ambassador Zethkari stood at the center podium, his 4 yellow eyes scanning the crowd. He was tall and thin with blue-gray skin and long arms that ended in hands with too many fingers. 2 small antennae on top of his bald head twitched as he spoke in his own language, the words coming out as clicks and whistles before the translation. Devices turned them into words the humans could understand. Representatives of the Galactic Council, Zethkari began, his translated voice carrying clearly through the chamber. We gather today to address a serious problem. The species calling themselves humans have been in our galaxy for only 50 of our standard cycles, yet they continue to ignore our laws and customs. Jake felt Lisa shift slightly beside him, but neither of them showed any emotion on their faces. They had expected this meeting to be hostile. Earth's government had sent them here knowing full well that the Council was not happy with humanity's expansion into space. A massive insect creature stood up from the front row, its 6 legs clicking against the metal floor. This was Hyde's speaker, Crix, representing the Vorthic Collective. The creature was twice as tall as any human, with glossy black armor covering its body and compound eyes that reflected the chamber's lights like dark mirrors. The humans have established colonies on 17 worlds without proper authorization. Crix buzzed, the translator making its voice sound mechanical and cold. They refuse to submit their genetic information for council approval. They ignore our territorial boundaries and trade only with species of their choosing. This cannot continue. More aliens began to speak, their voices creating a symphony of complaints against humanity. The Nexari, beings made of living crystal, chimed their concerns about human mining operations. The ethereals, gaseous creatures contained in special suits, pulsed angry red colors as they complained about human ships passing through their space without permission. One after another, the alien species listed their grievances against the newcomers from Earth. Jake listened to it all without speaking, his weathered face showing no reaction. He had commanded starships through asteroid fields and fought pirates in the outer colonies. He had seen things that would have broken lesser men, but he had learned long ago that showing weakness in front of enemies was a mistake that could cost lives. Finally, Zethkari raised one of his long arms for silence. The chamber grew quiet, thousands of alien eyes turning toward the small group of humans standing in their designated area. Captain Morrison, Zethkari said, his 4 eyes focusing on Jake with undisguised contempt. Your species has caused considerable disruption since arriving in our galaxy. The Council has been patient, but our patience has limits. Jake stood up slowly, buttoning his uniform jacket with deliberate care. Ambassador Zethkari, the human colonies were established on worlds that showed no signs of previous habitation. We followed all standard protocols for planetary settlement, as outlined in the Galactic Settlement Charter that your own council published. A wave of angry voices erupted from the alien representatives. Several species began shouting at once, their translators creating a confusing mix of protests and accusations. Jake could make out words like primitive, aggressive, and dangerous among the chaos. Zethkari slammed a metal staff against the floor 3 times, the sound echoing through the chamber like thunder. The noise gradually died down, but Jake could feel the hostility in the air like a physical weight pressing down on him. "The humans will listen to our terms," Zethkari continued, his voice taking on a tone that suggested he was used to being obeyed without question. "The Galactic Council has ruled this galaxy for over 10,000 cycles. We have brought peace and order to hundreds of species. We have ended wars and prevented conflicts that could have destroyed entire civilizations." The Alterian ambassador walked closer to where the humans stood, his movements smooth and predatory. "Your species is young and foolish. You do not understand the wisdom that comes with age and experience. You act without thinking, make decisions without consulting those who know better." Lisa stepped forward slightly, her voice calm but firm. "With respect, Ambassador, humanity has survived and thrived by making our own decisions. We've learned from our mistakes and grown stronger because of them." Zethkari's antenna twitched with what Jake had learned was the Alterian equivalent of a sneer. "Survived? Your species nearly destroyed itself with primitive weapons before you even reached space. You fought wars that killed millions over resources and territory. You are violent by nature, dangerous to yourselves and others. That's exactly why we're strong now," Jake said quietly. "We learned from those wars. We know the cost of conflict, better than species that have lived in peace for thousands of years." The chamber erupted again, but this time the anger was directed squarely at the human delegation. Alien voices rose in fury, demanding punishment for human insolence. Some species called for immediate military action, while others suggested economic sanctions or forced relocation. Hive speaker Crix clicked its mandibles together rapidly, a sound that Jake's briefing materials had described as the Vorthic equivalent of grinding teeth. "The humans must be brought under control before their violence spreads to other species. They are a disease that threatens the peace we have worked so hard to maintain." Zethkari raised his staff again, and slowly the chamber fell silent. "When?" He spoke. His voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "The Galactic Council offers humanity one chance to avoid destruction. You will accept our terms completely and without negotiation, or face the combined military might of 47 united species." Jake felt his heart rate increase slightly, but his expression remained unchanged. "What are your terms?" The Alterian ambassador smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth that looked more suited to a predator than a diplomat. "Complete submission to Council authority in all matters of government, trade, and military policy. Mandatory genetic modification to reduce your species' aggressive tendencies. Relocation of all human colonies to worlds designated by the Council for your use. Surrender of your entire military fleet to Council oversight and control." The silence that followed was complete. Even the constant background noise of alien conversations had stopped. Thousands of beings waited to see how the humans would respond to what was essentially a demand for total surrender. Jake looked at each of his companions, seeing his own thoughts reflected in their faces. They had known this moment would come eventually. Earth's leaders had prepared them for exactly this situation. "We'll need time to discuss this with Earth Command," Jake said finally. Zethkari's 4 eyes glittered with satisfaction. "You have exactly 72 hours to return with your answer. If you refuse our generous terms, the Council will provide its own solution to the human problem." The threat was clear and unmistakable. Jake nodded once, turned on his heel, and walked toward the chamber doors. His team followed in perfect formation, their footsteps echoing in the sudden silence dot as they left the chamber. Jake could hear the alien voices rising again behind them, discussing the humans' response and predicting their inevitable surrender. None of the aliens seemed to consider that humanity might choose to fight rather than submit. They would learn differently soon enough. 3 days had passed since the Galactic Council delivered their ultimatum to humanity. The massive chamber was packed beyond its normal capacity, as word had spread throughout the galaxy about the confrontation with the newcomer species. Representatives from distant star systems had traveled here just to witness what many expected would be humanity's inevitable surrender. Jake Morrison walked through the great doors again, but this time he was not alone with just a small diplomatic team. Behind him marched Admiral Susan Blake, her gray hair pulled back in a tight military bun and her blue uniform decorated with ribbons from dozens of campaigns. General Tony Martinez followed her, his scarred face telling the story of a man who had fought in ground battles across multiple worlds. Dr. Emma Rodriguez came next, carrying a datapad filled with scientific reports that most of the aliens in the chamber would find very disturbing if they knew what it contained. 20 more. Human officers followed in perfect formation, their black boots clicking against the metal floor in unison. The sound echoed through the chamber like a drumbeat, causing many of the alien representatives to shift nervously in their seats. This was not the behavior of a species preparing to surrender. Ambassador Zethkari stood at his podium, his 4 yellow eyes tracking the human delegation as they took their positions. His antenna twitched with what looked like satisfaction, clearly believing that the larger human presence meant they had come to negotiate the terms of their submission. Captain Morrison, Zethkari announced, his voice carrying clearly through. The translation system. I trust you have had sufficient time to consider our generous offer. The Council awaits your response. The chamber fell completely silent. Even the constant background chatter of alien conversations stopped as thousands of beings focused their attention on the small group of humans standing in the center of the vast hall. Many of the aliens leaned forward in their seats, eager to witness the moment when another species joined the long list of those who had submitted to council authority. Jake stepped forward, his hands clasped behind his back in a military parade rest position. His voice was calm and clear when he spoke, carrying easily to every corner of the enormous chamber. The United Earth government and all human colonies have reached a unanimous decision regarding your terms, he said. Zethkari's antenna stopped, twitching, his 4 eyes focusing intently on the human captain. Proceed. We reject your terms completely, Jake announced. Furthermore, humanity formally withdraws from all treaties and agreements with the Galactic Council, effective immediately. The reaction was instantaneous and explosive. Alien voices erupted in anger, shock, and disbelief from every section of the chamber. The insect-like Vorthik began their traditional war chanting, a buzzing sound that made the air vibrate. The crystalline Nexari chimed discord that hurt human ears. The gaseous ethereals pulsed violent red and orange colors that their species used to express rage. Hive Speaker Crix rose from its seat, all 6 legs clicking against the floor as it towered over the smaller beings around it. Impossible. The creature buzzed, its compound eyes reflecting the chamber lights like black mirrors. No species has ever dared to reject council authority. You cannot simply refuse our commands. General Martinez stepped forward, the movement causing several nearby aliens to flinch backward. His voice carried the hard edge of a man who had seen too many battles and buried too many friends. Maybe that's your problem right there, he said, his eyes scanning the alien representatives with obvious contempt. You've gotten so used to everyone rolling over that you've forgotten some species know how to bite back. The chamber exploded into chaos again, but this time there was a different quality to the noise. Fear was mixing with the anger as the reality of the human response began to sink in. Several of the smaller species began moving toward the exits, clearly wanting no part of whatever was about to happen. Zethkari slammed his metal staff against the podium repeatedly, the sound cutting through the noise like thunder. Slowly the chamber quieted, but the tension remained thick enough to cut with a knife. You understand what this means? The Alterian ambassador demanded, his voice shaking with fury. War with 47 united species? Your primitive technology against the combined might of civilizations that have ruled the stars for thousands of years? Dr. Rodriguez spoke for the first time, her voice carrying the calm confidence of a scientist presenting research data. Primitive technology? She asked, raising an eyebrow. We've spent the last 3 years studying every piece of technology we could get our hands on. Your histories, your weapons, your tactics. Do you want to know what we learned? Several aliens leaned forward despite themselves, curious about what the human female might say. Dr. Rodriguez smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression. We learned that you rely on numbers and intimidation because you've forgotten how to actually fight, she continued. Most of your species haven't seen real combat in centuries. You conquer defenseless worlds and call it military strategy. The ethereal representative pulsed a deep purple color that indicated confusion. Our fleets number in the hundreds of thousands, it transmitted through its suit's speakers. Your entire species has fewer ships than some of our individual member states. Admiral Blake stepped forward, her weathered face showing the kind of smile that made seasoned combat veterans nervous. Numbers aren't everything, she said quietly. We learned that lesson the hard way, fighting each other for thousands of years before we reached the stars. While you were busy conquering species that couldn't fight back, we were perfecting the art of war against equals. Zethkaris 4. Eyes narrowed to slits. You are outnumbered 1,000,000 to 1. Your entire civilization could be crushed within days. Jake Morrison's expression never changed, but something cold and dangerous flickered in his eyes. We've faced worse odds before, he said simply. Ask the Martian Colonial Alliance about odds. Oh wait, you can't. They tried to wipe us out during the colonial wars 30 years ago. Now Mars is just another human world. The chamber had grown so quiet that the sound of alien breathing and mechanical life support systems seemed loud in the silence. Many of the representatives were staring at the humans with expressions that their translators couldn't properly interpret. But the meaning was clear enough. These beings were not behaving like any species that had ever appeared before the council. This is madness. Hive speaker Crix buzzed, its voice rising to a pitch that made several nearby aliens cover their hearing organs. You cannot survive against our combined forces. We will crush your worlds and scatter your survivors across the galaxy as slaves. General Martinez looked up at the towering insect creature with the kind of expression he might use when examining something unpleasant on the bottom of his boot. You're welcome to try, he said. But remember something important. Every species you've conquered before was peaceful. They built cities and wrote poetry and created art. We built weapons. We've been killing each other with increasingly creative methods for 50,000 years. War isn't something we learned from books or simulations. It's what we do. Dr. Rodriguez opened her datapad and began reading from it in the same tone she might use to discuss weather patterns. According to our analysis of Council military records, the average member species has engaged in active warfare for less than 2% of their recorded history. Humans have been at war with someone for 97% of ours. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of some aliens shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Several of the smaller species had quietly left the chamber entirely, apparently deciding that they wanted no part of whatever was coming next. Zethkaris' antennae were now twitching, so rapidly they were almost a blur. You are signing your own death warrant, he snarled. The combined fleets of the Council will reduce your worlds to radioactive dust. Jake Morrison looked around the chamber one final time, his gaze passing over thousands of alien faces. When? He spoke, His voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had commanded ships through impossible situations and brought them home safely. "Ambassador," he said, "you can certainly try to destroy us, but remember this. We didn't come to your galaxy asking for permission. We didn't come here begging for protection. We came here as equals, ready to trade and cooperate. You chose to make us enemies instead." The human delegation turned as one and began walking toward the chamber doors. Their boots clicked against the metal floor in perfect unison, the sound echoing through the vast hall like a countdown timer dot. Just before they reached the exit, Jake Morrison stopped and looked back over his shoulder at the assembled aliens. "Oh, an ambassador?" he called out, his voice carrying clearly through the silent chamber. "When your fleets come for us, remember that we know where all of your worlds are too." The doors closed behind the humans with a sound like thunder, leaving the Galactic Council in stunned silence. Within hours of the human delegation walking out of the Galactic Council chambers, emergency sirens began wailing throughout the capital world of Alteria Prime. The massive government complex transformed from a center of diplomacy into a military command hub as representatives from 47 species worked frantically to coordinate the largest military operation in galactic history. Fleet Admiral Kethmer stood in the center of the main war room, his blue-gray skin glistening with moisture, as tactical displays showed ship positions throughout the galaxy. His four eyes moved rapidly between different screens, while his long fingers manipulated holographic controls that sent orders to fleets scattered across thousands of light years. "Status report," Kethner demanded, his voice cutting through the noise of dozens of alien officers working at their stations. General Vex Tar of the Hegemony Ground Forces stepped forward, his massive bulk causing the floor to vibrate slightly with each step. The creature stood nearly 3 meters tall and was covered in thick gray hide that had turned to living armor through centuries of genetic modification. Combined fleet strength now stands at 197,000 combat vessels. Vexstar rumbled, his voice like grinding stone. Troop transports number another 50,000 ships. We have assembled the largest military force in recorded galactic history. High Inquisitor Mordith of the Zealot Collective raised her energy staff, the weapon crackling with barely contained power. Her species looked almost human, except for their pure white skin and completely black eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "My intelligence networks report that the humans have fewer than 10,000 ships total," she said, her voice carrying the cold certainty of someone who had never been wrong about military intelligence. "Most of those are converted civilian vessels with minimal combat capability. This will not be a war. It will be an extermination." The war room buzzed with confident chatter as alien officers shared similar assessments. The mathematics seemed simple and undeniable. Even if every human fought to the death, the Council forces outnumbered them by nearly 20 to 1. Several species had already begun discussing how to divide up human territory after the inevitable victory, while the Galactic Council prepared for what they expected to be a quick and decisive campaign. Human space was experiencing a very different kind of preparation. On Earth, President Linda Walsh stood before a joint session of Congress and the Colonial Assembly, her image being transmitted simultaneously to every human world and station in the galaxy. "My fellow humans," she began, her voice steady despite the enormous weight of the moment. 50 years ago, our species took its first steps beyond our home world. Today, we face the greatest challenge in human history. The Galactic Council has demanded our complete surrender or threatened our total destruction. The camera focused on her face as she paused, looking directly into the lens as if she could see every human watching her across the vast distances of space. They believe we will surrender because that is what every other species has done when faced with their superior numbers. They do not understand that we are not like other species. We are the children of a world that tried to kill us for millions of years. We are the descendants of survivors who faced ice ages and plagues and disasters that would have destroyed weaker species. On the colony world of New Texas, Colonel Rick Johnson stood in the command bunker deep beneath the planet's capital city of Houston. Around him, dozens of officers coordinated the transformation of an entire world from a peaceful farming colony into a fortress that could withstand anything that the Council might throw at them. Status on the orbital platforms? Johnson asked his Chief of Staff, Major Beth Collins. Beth consulted her datapad, scrolling through reports from construction teams working around the clock in the cold vacuum of space. 16 platforms operational, sir. Another 8 will be ready within 48 hours. The converted mining stations are exceeding all performance expectations. Johnson nodded grimly. New Texas had been settled primarily by former military personnel who wanted to try their hand at farming, but they had never forgotten their training. When the call came to prepare for war, they had responded with the efficiency that only professional soldiers could manage. What about ground defenses? He asked. 30,000 colonial Marines are already in position, Beth replied. Local militia adds another 100,000 fighters. We've got enough supplies stockpiled to hold out for 6 months, even under full siege conditions. Similar conversations were taking place on dozens of human worlds throughout the galaxy. On New Britain, Commander Frank Davis supervised the installation of defensive systems that looked like ordinary buildings, but concealed weapons capable of destroying capital ships. On Meridian Station, Captain Amy Wilson coordinated with civilian engineers to convert cargo haulers into improvised warships that could carry enough firepower to cripple a destroyer. But the most important preparations were happening in the Sol system itself, where Admiral Susan Blake commanded the largest concentration of human military power in the galaxy. From the bridge of her flagship, the battleship Earth's Hammer, she watched as hundreds of ships took their positions in the defensive formations that would determine humanity's fate. Fleet status report, Blake ordered. Commander Steve Turner, her longtime chief of staff, looked up from his tactical display. Home fleet reports 800 combat-ready vessels, Admiral. Colony fleets have another 2,000 ships en route to rendezvous points. Industrial facilities on Luna and Mars are operating at maximum capacity, turning out new weapons and equipment every hour. Blake studied the numbers on her main screen, but her expression remained calm, despite the overwhelming odds they faced. She had commanded fleets through the colonial wars and fought against desperate enemies who had nothing left to lose. She knew that numbers alone did not determine the outcome of battles. What's the status on our special projects? She asked quietly. Turner's scarred face showed the first hint of a smile he had displayed in days. Project Prometheus is ahead of schedule, Admiral. Dr. Harper says the prototype systems will be ready for testing within 72 hours. The gravity manipulation array is performing beyond all theoretical expectations. Blake nodded slowly. The humans had learned much during their brief time as members of galactic civilization, including access to technologies that the Council species had developed over thousands of years. But what the aliens had never considered was what might happen when those technologies were combined by a species that had spent most of its history finding new and creative ways to kill each other. Signal all commands, Blake ordered. Condition: read throughout human space. All civilian traffic is to be routed through secure corridors. Combat fleets are to take defensive positions, but avoid any aggressive actions until hostilities begin. The bridge crew moved with practiced efficiency to carry out her orders, but Blake could see the tension in their faces. They all knew what was coming. The largest military force in galactic history was assembling to destroy them, and their only hope lay in weapons and tactics that had never been tested in real combat. Dr. Elizabeth, Harper stood in the control room of the Prometheus research station, hidden in the asteroid belt beyond Mars, where no alien sensors could detect it. Around her, teams of scientists and engineers worked frantically to complete the most ambitious weapons project in human history. Gravitational field generators are online, reported her assistant, Dr. Kevin Clark. All 17 stations report. Ready status. The targeting systems are locked onto the primary approach vectors that Council fleets will have to use to reach Earth. Harper studied the data streaming across her screens, checking and rechecking calculations that would mean the difference between victory and extinction for the human species. The science behind the Prometheus array was sound, based on gravitational manipulation technology that several Council species had developed for moving asteroids and building space stations. But no one had ever thought to weaponize it on this scale. Remember, she told her team, we only get one chance at this. If the array fails, or if our calculations are wrong, there won't be time for adjustments. The entire human fleet will be counting on us to level the playing field. Across human space, similar preparations continued around the clock as an entire species prepared for what many believed would be their final battle. Factories that had produced farming equipment were retooled to manufacture weapons. Civilian pilots volunteered for military service, knowing they would be flying converted cargo ships against purpose-built warships. Children were evacuated to underground shelters while their parents took positions in defensive installations. But perhaps the most important preparation was happening in the hearts and minds of ordinary humans who had decided that some things were worth dying for. Freedom was not something that could be negotiated away or surrendered in exchange for safety. It was a principle that had to be defended, no matter the cost. The storm was gathering on both sides of the galaxy, and soon the universe would learn whether the Council's overwhelming numbers could defeat a species that had never learned how to surrender. The first shots of what would become known as the Galactic War were fired at 0347 hours, Earth Standard Time in the Kepler 442 system. 500 ships from 12 different Council species dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, where the human colony of Haven's Rest orbited an orange dwarf star. Fleet Admiral Kethmer watched the tactical displays from the bridge of his flagship, the massive dreadnought Stellar Dominion. The ship was over 2 kilometers long and carried enough firepower to reduce a small moon to dust. Around it, the Council's first assault waves spread out in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming in the distant starlight. Scan shows the target world, reported his tactical officer, a thin Nexari whose crystalline body chimed softly as it spoke. Population approximately 50,000 humans. Minimal orbital defenses detected. 3 patrol craft and what appears to be a few mining platforms. Kethmer's 4 eyes studied the readouts with satisfaction. Haven's Rest was exactly the kind of soft target the Council preferred for opening moves. A quick victory here would demonstrate their overwhelming power while minimizing their own losses. The psychological impact on other human colonies would be devastating. Open a channel to the planet, Kethmer ordered. The communication system crackled to life, and a human voice responded almost immediately. This is Commander Doug Peterson, Haven's Rest Defense Command. State your business in human space. Several alien officers on the bridge made sounds that their translators interpreted as laughter. The idea that 50,000 colonists could offer any meaningful resistance to 500 warships struck them as absurd beyond belief. Human Commander, Kethmer transmitted, his voice carrying the cold authority of someone who had never been disobeyed. You are facing the combined fleet of 12 Council species. Surrender immediately, and your people will be relocated to appropriate facilities. Resist, and your world will be reduced to radioactive ash. The response came back without any hesitation. Admiral, this is human territory. You're in violation of our space. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences." The alien bridge crew erupted in what sounded like alien laughter mixed with disbelief. Several officers began chattering excitedly in their native languages about the stupidity of the human response. Kethmer raised one long arm for silence. "You have 1 hour to reconsider," he transmitted. "After that, we begin bombardment operations." Commander Peterson's reply was immediate and delivered in the same calm tone he might use to discuss weather reports. "Then you better get started, Admiral." The first shots came from the Vorthik heavy cruiser Hive's Vengeance, its plasma cannons targeting the small orbital platforms that orbited Haven's Rest. The human defensive fire seemed pathetically weak. Against the Council ship's advanced shielding, nothing more than converted mining lasers and kinetic projectiles that barely scratched the alien hulls. Kethmer watched the one-sided battle with growing confidence. The human platforms were putting up token resistance, but they would be swept aside within minutes. This would be even easier than his most optimistic projections had suggested. That was when the asteroid belt came alive. What the Council sensors had dismissed as ordinary space debris suddenly revealed itself to be something far more dangerous. Hidden weapon platforms that had been disguised as asteroids began powering up throughout the system, their energy signatures blazing across the tactical displays like newborn stars. The Nexari light cruiser, Crystal Shard, was the first to die, caught completely off guard as 3 hidden platforms focused their fire on its power core. The ship exploded in a brilliant cascade of exotic matter and twisted metal, its crystalline crew killed instantly when their life support systems failed. "Impossible," Kethmer snarled, his 4 eyes darting between tactical displays that showed weapon platforms appearing throughout the system. "Our intelligence showed no significant defensive installations." The ethereal destroyer Wind of Eternity found itself trapped in a crossfire between platforms that shouldn't have existed according to every piece of intelligence the Council had gathered. Its gaseous crew began venting into space as human weapons tore through its hull like paper. Commander Peterson's voice crackled across the communication channels again, and this time there was definite amusement in his tone. "That's the thing about humans, Admiral. We're really good at making things look like something they're not." The battle raged for 6 hours as the Council fleet's superior numbers and firepower gradually wore down the human defenses. But the cost was far higher than anyone had expected. 37 alien ships were destroyed or crippled, while the humans lost only their orbital platforms and a handful of patrol craft. Hyde Speaker Crix, commanding the Vorthik contingent from his personal ship, buzzed angrily over the fleet communication network. How did they hide so many weapons? Our sensors should have detected any significant military installations. They used our own technology against us, admitted the Nexari fleet commander, its crystalline voice chiming with what sounded like grudging respect. Those platforms were built using standard asteroid mining equipment, modified with weapons that register as industrial tools until they power up. As the surviving human defenses finally fell silent, Kethmer prepared to order the bombardment of Haven's Rest itself. The colonists had fought better than expected, but the outcome had never been in doubt. Now it was time to make an example that would discourage other human worlds from offering resistance. "All ships prepare for orbital bombardment," he commanded. "Target population centers first, then industrial facilities." That was when Commander Peterson activated Haven's Rest's final surprise. The planet's surface opened in 12 locations around the equator, revealing massive electromagnetic pulse generators that had been built deep underground during the colonies' construction. The humans had learned from studying Council technology that most alien ships relied heavily on complex computer systems that could be disrupted by powerful electromagnetic fields. The EMP burst that erupted from Haven's Rest was unlike anything the Council forces had ever encountered. Every ship within 50,000 kilometers found their systems crashing simultaneously as electromagnetic energy overloaded their computer networks and disabled their primary power systems. The mighty Council fleet found itself drifting helplessly. In space, their crews frantically working to restore basic life support, while their weapons and engines remained offline. Emergency power systems struggled to come online as backup computers tried to restart critical ship functions. Kethmer stared at his dead control panels in disbelief, emergency lighting casting strange shadows across his bridge as his crew worked desperately to restore ship functions. How long until we regain control? He demanded. 30 minutes minimum for basic systems, his chief engineer reported. Full restoration could take hours. By the time the Council ships regained control of their vessels, Haven's Rest was empty. The planet's entire population had been evacuated through underground launch tubes to hidden transport ships that had been waiting in the outer system. The evacuation plan had been rehearsed hundreds of times, allowing 50,000 people to disappear in less than an hour. Commander Peterson's final transmission reached the Council fleet just as their communication systems came back online. Admiral, tell your Council that was just the appetizer. The main course is waiting at Earth. Kethmer surveyed the tactical damage reports with growing horror. Nearly 40 ships lost or severely damaged in what should have been a simple pacification mission. An entire human colony evacuated without a trace. Most importantly, the Council fleet's aura of invincibility had been shattered in a single engagement. Sir, his tactical officer reported quietly, we're receiving priority communications from Council Command. They want a full report on how we lost so many ships to a handful of mining platforms. Kethmer closed his 4 eyes and tried to think of how to explain that the humans had just redefined the rules of warfare. They had turned mining equipment into weapons, disguised military installations as asteroids, and used the Council's own technology to disable an entire fleet. Signal the fleet, he ordered finally. We proceed to the Sol system, but we go carefully this time. The humans have already proven they're more dangerous than we anticipated. As the battered Council fleet began moving toward Earth, news of the Battle of Haven's Rest spread throughout human space. The impossible had happened. A small colony with minimal defenses had bloodied the nose of the mighty Galactic Council and lived to tell about it. On worlds throughout human territory, colonists and Marines alike felt their confidence grow. If Haven's Rest could make the aliens pay such a heavy price, what might happen when the Council faced the full might of Earth's defenses? The first battle was over, but the real war was just beginning. 3 months after the disaster at Haven's Rest, the largest military fleet in galactic history assembled at the edge of the Sol system. Nearly 200,000 ships from 47 species created a formation that stretched across millions of kilometers of space, their hulls blocking out entire sections of stars as they prepared for the final assault on humanity's home world. Admiral Kethmer stood on the bridge of his new flagship, the super dreadnought Galactic Wrath, and stared at the tactical displays showing Earth's pathetic defenses. The humans had concentrated their entire fleet around their home world in what appeared to be a desperate last stand, but their numbers remained laughably small compared to the Council Armada. Final intelligence report shows approximately 3,000 human combat vessels, his tactical officer reported, her crystalline voice chiming with confidence. They've positioned themselves in a defensive sphere around their planet, but our forces outnumber them by more than 60 to 1. Kethmer nodded, but the memory of Haven's Rest made him cautious. The humans had proven more resourceful than anyone had expected, and he had no intention of underestimating them again. Still, no amount of cleverness could overcome odds this overwhelming. All fleet commanders report ready, his communications officer announced. The Council species are eager to end this embarrassment once and for all. On Earth, the mood was grim, but determined as humanity prepared for what everyone knew would be their final battle. In the underground command center, buried deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, Admiral Susan Blake coordinated with her fleet commanders, while President Linda Walsh watched from the executive bunker. All ships report battle ready, Commander Steve Turner announced from his position at the tactical station. Colony fleets have reached their assigned positions. Project Prometheus is online and standing by for activation. Blake studied the massive alien fleet approaching Earth through the outer sensor network, her weathered face showing no emotion despite the impossible odds they faced. She had spent her entire career preparing for moments like this, when everything depended on making the right decisions under impossible pressure. Dr. Harper, are you certain the Prometheus array will function as designed? Blake asked. Dr. Elizabeth Harper looked up from her control station, her eyes showing the exhaustion of someone who had worked around the clock for months to complete humanity's most ambitious weapons project. Admiral, we've tested every component multiple times. The gravitational manipulation technology is based on proven Council science, but combined in ways they never imagined. The Council fleet entered the solar system like a black tide washing across space, their ships arranged in perfect formation as they advanced toward Earth. The human fleet moved to intercept them, but their numbers seemed insignificant against the alien armada that stretched beyond the horizon of Space Dock Captain Jake Morrison, now commanding the battleship Liberty's Edge, opened a communication channel to the entire Council fleet. His voice carried clearly across space to reach every alien commander preparing for what they expected to be an easy victory. This is your final warning, Morrison announced. Withdraw from human space immediately, or face complete destruction. The response from Kethmer came back immediately, his translated voice filled with contempt for the species that had dared to defy the Council's authority. Human, you are facing the combined might of 47 civilizations. Surrender now, and we may allow some of your people to survive as servants. Morrison smiled grimly as he looked at the wall of enemy ships approaching Earth. Dr. Harper, you may initiate Prometheus at your discretion. Hidden throughout the asteroid belt, on the dark side of the moon, and at dozens of carefully concealed positions around the solar system, a network of gravitational manipulation stations powered up simultaneously. For 3 years, humanity's best scientists had studied every piece of Council technology they could acquire, reverse engineering and combining technologies in ways the alien species had never considered possible. The effect was immediate and devastating. Artificial gravity wells opened throughout the Council formation, invisible hands of twisted space-time that reached out to grab ships and drag them out of position. The massive fleet's numerical advantage instantly became a liability as vessels collided with each other or were pulled into uncontrolled spins by gravitational forces that defied every law of space combat. Impossible. Kethmer shouted as his flagship was caught in a gravity field that threatened to tear it apart. No species has weaponized gravitational manipulation on this scale. But the true horror began when the gravity field started to compress. Entire squadrons of alien ships were crushed like insects in an invisible fist, their hulls crumpling inward as artificial gravity wells collapsed to singular points. Crews that had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years died in seconds as the fundamental forces of physics turned against them. The Vorthek battle group found itself caught in a gravitational maze where up and down no longer had meaning. Ships that tried to maneuver away from one gravity well were pulled into another, creating a deadly dance of destruction that tore the formation apart. Hive Speaker Crix watched in horror as his flagship was pulled toward what appeared to be empty space, only to be crushed when the hidden gravity generator activated. All ships retreat. Kethmer screamed over the communication network, emergency hyperspace jump protocols. But the humans had anticipated this response. The gravity. Wells interfered with hyperspace navigation, creating distortions that made faster-than-light travel impossible within the solar system. The Council fleet found itself trapped in normal space, where they could be systematically destroyed by weapons they couldn't see or understand. The Nexari contingent tried to reform their battle lines, but their crystalline ships shattered when caught between opposing gravity fields that pulled them in different directions. The ethereal fleet attempted to use their superior maneuverability to escape, but found their gaseous forms being torn apart by gravitational shears that no physical armor could resist. General Tony Martinez watched the destruction from his command post on Luna, his scarred face showing grim satisfaction as the alien fleet that had come to enslave humanity tore itself apart. Estimated enemy losses? He asked his tactical officer. Over 70% and climbing, sir, came the reply. The gravity fields are creating a cascade effect. Ships trying to escape one trap are being pulled into others. The battle lasted only 4 hours, but it changed the balance of power in the galaxy forever. When the gravitational fields finally shut down, fewer than 30,000 ships remained from the mighty Council Armada. The rest had been crushed, torn apart, or scattered as wreckage across the solar system. Admiral Blake addressed the surviving Council commanders on all frequencies, her voice carrying the cold authority of absolute victory. This is Admiral Blake, of the Earth Defense Force. You came here to force our submission, and instead learned why humanity survived when others fell. We don't just fight wars, we end them. The communication channel crackled with static before Blake continued. I'm transmitting new terms to your surviving fleet commanders. Complete withdrawal from all human space. Recognition of human sovereignty over our colonies. And a mutual non-aggression pact that acknowledges our right to exist without counsel. Interference. Kethmer stared at his tactical displays, showing the wreckage of what had been the most powerful military force in galactic history. His 4 eyes focused on the small blue planet that had just redefined warfare itself. What if we refuse your terms? He asked quietly. Blake's response was immediate and terrifying in its simplicity. Then we'll bring this same lesson to every Council world in the galaxy. Your choice, Admiral. The silence that followed lasted for several minutes as the surviving alien commanders contemplated a universe where their species were no longer the dominant power. Finally, Kethmer activated his communication system. The Galactic Council accepts your terms, he said, his voice barely above a whisper dot as the battered remnants of the Council fleet limped away from Earth. Humanity stood victorious, but forever changed. They had rejected diplomacy, survived war of extinction, and emerged as a power that would reshape the galaxy. The age of Council dominance was over, replaced by something the universe had never seen before. A species that would rather face annihilation than surrender their freedom. Had proven that some things were worth any price to defend.